Hello, this is Miss V, and today we're getting into lesson one. This is quarter one, unit two, and this unit is called Early Empires. So, as I mentioned before in class, we're looking at the early empires that existed in Europe and those that existed in the Middle East and Northern Africa, and how religion really influenced and also made an impact in those empires and how the religion was able to spread throughout Europe and throughout the Middle East and Africa. So let's get into this one. All right, so these are the standards that we're going to look at in terms of this particular lesson on the Byzantine Empire. The one I really want you to focus on is this one, being able to analyze the extent of the Byzantine Empire, seeing it as a continuation of the old Roman Empire and how it spread to the east, and in the ways which it was just a departure of that old Roman Empire, and they just continued it. Right? So being able to break that down would be awesome. Also, this is the question we're going to get to at the end of our unit. So next week when we get into the Islamic Empire and we kind of compare and contrast both, I want you to be able to answer this question about how did religion made such an impact or have such an influence on these cultures, okay? So we're going to come back to that question, but just keep that in mind as we go along with this lesson. All right, so in Constantinople, in the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire we know of as the Colosseum and Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus and so forth. But after a while, the Roman Empire then was split into a western area and an eastern area, okay? And the capital was then moved from Rome to Constantinople, okay? So, if you recall your map, you should know exactly where Constantinople is, and it hits right on the Bosphorus Strait, okay? So for thousands of years, the Western Empire, after the collapse of that empire, Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire, would then carry on the glory of the Roman Empire. And they also believed that they were the heirs to the Western Empire of Rome, right? So because of all of the issues that were happening in Spain with the Visigoths and the Franks that were what we call now as France, they were getting attacked from that area, and also the Islamic empires that were growing. So many of those Romans started to move to the east and go towards Constantinople, okay? So that should be the answer for your first question. Then one of our most impactful key individuals would be Emperor Justinian. Justinian was determined to reestablish the Roman Empire, especially in the Mediterranean world. And he was able to accomplish this. He was able to do this massive feat. As you see here on the bottom, he was able to expand the empire not only here in the Middle Eastern area in Greece and in what was called Anatolia at that time. He was able to expand it further out to the western areas of Europe and parts of Northern Africa, okay? So this will be our answer for question number 2. Also, Emperor Justinian was also known for his codification of Roman law. Codification in law means to be able to summarize or to break down into certain sections, or taking various laws that are very complicated and putting them into certain codes or sections so that they're able to be followed easier, right? And that's what he did. He took all of these legal materials, all of these laws and so forth, especially laws that's dealing with civics or civil law, marriage, acting as a citizen, things like that. And he was able to create it as one simple code or one simple body of law called the Body of Civil Law, and what we now call as Justinian's Code. Okay, and that was one of the most important pieces for the Byzantine Empire, because much of that law, as it was written in Latin, was then being able to be used throughout the Western Roman Empire and became a lot of the legal system for much of Europe. As a matter of fact, it became very influential throughout our modern times. Okay, a lot of that information or the codification that's used in the United States legal system can be traced back to Justinian's code. Okay, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later in this unit. So a quick check. So here we have some information or primary source. And if you look on the bottom, there's some information here. Take a quick look and read through it. And you're going to use the analytical tool AP Party to determine the author and place and time for this primary source. So go ahead and just find out for me and let me know in Edpuzzle what is the author and what is the place and time. All right, so if you read this carefully and you look through this carefully, you will determine that the analytical tool here with using AP Party, the author, of course, would be Justinian's code or Emperor Justinian, right? And the place and time, if you remember prior to, we talked about Emperor Justinian. So obviously we're talking about the Byzantine Empire, or if you said Constantinople, that's fine as well. And the time here would be 535 CE or the Common Era, or after the death of Christ. Okay, so any one of those would be great. So this was Justinian's code on marriage. So you may want to take a look and read through that because you may see it again soon. Okay. All right. So Justinian's accomplishments was great and it was magnificent, but the Eastern Empire still had some problems, and they had serious problems. One of those problems was having so much vast territory that Justinian was not able to handle navigating or governing that vast amount of territory. So he wasn't able to protect it as much because there were a lot of threats coming from different areas. The Persians in the east, right? East of Turkey or east of Constantinople, there was that area of Persia, which is now called Iraq and Iran, right? So they were attacking them. You have the Slavics that was above Greece that was attacking them. And then the Islamic empires that's in Northern Africa and parts of the Middle East that was attacking them. The Visigoths, the Franks, all were attacking them. So because of those threats, and then they're so spread apart, it was hard for them to stay in power. Also, their treasury was depleted. They didn't have much money. And also because of the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague is what we call as Black Death. Now, we're going to talk about the bubonic plague later during the Middle Ages, but this was the first bout of it. And it really took a havoc on the Byzantine Empire, and a lot of people died, which led to a decline in the population. Okay? So this led to a smaller Eastern European Roman Empire, and we call this the Byzantine Empire, but it was flourishing, but because of those problems, it did fall. Okay. So as you see here, this was the Byzantine Empire from 1650 CE, and then by the 1717 CE, it got very small because of all of these threats that they had around them. Okay. So the Byzantine Empire was very much influenced by Greek culture, but also they were heavily influenced by Christianity. And you'll see that among the artistic talent that I've shown you, some of the artwork that you've seen in some of my slides, and also their churches. Their churches were very ornate, very decorative, and so forth. One of those examples is the Hagia Sophia, okay, which we'll come up to in a minute. However, the emperor was very crucial in this position. The emperor was to be portrayed as chosen by God. So because they were chosen by God or divine by God, his power, the emperor's power, was absolute. So whatever the emperor said goes. okay? And he was able to exercise control as the head of the church and as the head of the state or the country, okay? So that's how much power the emperor had in the Byzantine Empire, okay? And that would be question number 6 and 7. So just to follow up and make sure you're good. All right, so Emperor Justinian rebuilt Constantinople, and it gave that appearance that it was very flourishing, and it was a flourishing empire. And Constantinople became the greatest center of commerce during the 12th century. So that's the 1100s, the 10 to 1100s AD or CE, okay? And that led up to close to the Middle Ages. So a lot of trade was happening through Constantinople. A lot of traders would try to track their trade to get to Asia through Constantinople. So it opened them up to having a flourishing economy. However, because they were so open with commerce and trade, they were allowing a lot of others to come in and attack, okay? But the city was also dominated by large complexes, huge churches, thousands of churches, and an area known as the Hippodrome, okay? And as you see here, this was some of the aqueducts that they used to draw water from the Mediterranean Sea. And it's quite an architectural feature and a feat because that we're talking about the 1100s. They didn't have that much going on then to create such a big structure, but they did. And they were able to siphon water from the through the aqueducts into Constantinople to have a thriving community. And this is the Hagia Sophia. So this is one of the churches that was built in Constantinople, and it still is here today. It is a museum today that you can visit at any time, right? So here's a quick check and to be a detective. This is an image inside the Hagia Sophia that was in Constantinople. Still stands today, but Constantinople is now Istanbul when the Byzantine Empire fell. So now today it's called Istanbul, okay? So what I want you to do is become a detective and dissect this photo. Which objects do you see in here in this photo that would indicate the change of the Hagia Sophia from a church to a mosque? So tell me what you see and put it in your Edpuzzle section. All right, so if you've been a great detective, you probably would notice here in this section right here, there's some Arabic writing. And that Arabic writing indicates that the church was no longer a church anymore when Constantinople fell and became Istanbul. When the Islamic Empire came in, they changed the church into a mosque. So now this is the indication of Islam being a part of this particular building now. Another way to indicate that this is now a mosque is from the large domes. Domes is a big architectural feature of Islamic architecture, and they kind of used this model of the Hagia Sophia and carried it throughout their traditions in Islam. So now in Islam, whenever you see that dome feature, you would know that that's a mosque, okay? So if you're able to catch that, awesome job. All right, so the Hippodrome, as we talked about, this could hold 60,000 people, and it was like an entertainment center. They had chariot races, they had performing acts, and then they had different teams that were very rowdy, right? And they would wear the colors in certain areas that were worn by their heroes. So some areas would wear green, some would wear red, and that would indicate different teams. So it was almost like the Colosseum, but just in a different place, okay? All right, so the Macedonian emperors, these were a line of emperors that existed in the Byzantine Empire, and they helped to grow the empire to the largest it became, Okay. They were able to foster economic prosperity by expanding trade relations throughout Western Europe. And they started selling silks and metalworks, and that really helped to boost the economy of the Byzantine Empire. And this would be your answer to your question number 10. Okay, so just to track and make sure that you're on the right path. All right, so there were some schisms. And a schism is a growing split or a departure or departure between two groups, okay? The Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Church. And the reason why they had this issue was because there was trouble that began in 1730 when the Emperor Leo, he decided that the use of icons was considered idolatry. And icons in this case are pictures, right, as you see here. So he thought that icons would be considered worshiping idols, okay? And this was called the iconoclast controversy because they figured, or he figured, that it was almost blasphemous or it was sinful for Christians to have icons or pictures that it went to as far as idolatry in terms of worshiping Christ. So he wanted to outlaw that, and he did in the Byzantine Empire, and that caused confusion with the Western Empire. John of Damascus, which is in the Western Empire, resisted the call from Emperor Leo III that he was like, okay, it's icons, they're not idols. Okay, he's saying that, if you have holy images, we're just having holy images. It's not anything sinful about it, right? But that didn't make any point. It didn't help because they still had problems, okay? The damage was already done. And due to this iconoclast controversy, this caused a big rift between the two sections. And now the church actually started to split, okay? This even came to a bigger head when the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople, or the Byzantine Empire, was unwilling to accept the Pope as the sole head of the church. So Pope Leo the Fourth, he decided to excommunicate. He decided to excommunicate the other patriarch in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And by doing that, they kind of excommunicated each other from being pope, and they're kind of not allowing each other to run the church. So because of that, now there is a big controversy, and they never really completely healed. So that's why even to today, there is the Holy Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East. And it's still that way up to today. You still have the Eastern Orthodox Church that exists in Istanbul. Okay, so that's why it's great to understand things that happened in the past so you know exactly why it is the way it is in the future or today, right? All right, so hopefully you got all of that information. You need to work on the back part with the map, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.